If you still have your songbooks out, you might go ahead and mark the invitation song. It's going to be 825, Come Unto Me, as the invitation song. And while you're getting settled, mark that at 825 and open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5, to the Sermon on the Mount. That's where we're at least going to be starting this morning. I'm really grateful for all of you who are here this morning. I'm not completely sure about this, but it looks like we might have more here this morning than we've had so far, in just from the looks of it, but also because we've run out of songbooks over there. And so I'm sorry for the scrambling around here while everybody was singing, but I was trying to make sure there's enough songbooks. If you don't have one, we're going to sing the invitation song and a song to prepare our minds for the Lord's Supper. So it would be worth your time to come up here and grab one for the last two songs after the lesson. And also, I see that a few of you came in after we had already started singing. I'm glad that you're here. I'm not saying that to pick. Only if you don't have Lord's Supper supplies, as soon as we're finished with the lesson, we're going to share in the Lord's Supper together. And there is a box up here of prepackaged Lord's Supper stuff. And so if you don't have that, you're going to want to make sure to have that also. One more thing, and then I'll go ahead and get started with the lesson. On Sunday nights, we are meeting again. This Sunday night will be our second Sunday night meeting in the building. And I realize, for a couple reasons, that excludes some people. There are some folks who don't feel comfortable coming to gather together with a group of people in the building. And besides that, we have capacity limits still in St. Louis County. So even if all of you wanted to come on Sunday night, you couldn't. We couldn't do it all inside the building. And so Mark and I had a crazy idea. Before you just stop listening, there's no such thing as normal anymore. So at least as we're inside the confines of what's scriptural, hear me out on the crazy idea. We're going to take one of the speakers tonight and run the wire in through the window behind me and plug it into our audio system on the inside, so that, hopefully, Mark is confident that this will work, so that, hopefully, if you want to come and visit afterwards and study and sing with us tonight, we could even open up the windows on this side of the building to share in some singing with nothing but a wall between us. You could do that. You could come and you'll be able to hear whoever leads singing through the microphone at the podium, and you'll be able to hear me through the lapel microphone. And so that at least is an option for you. The only thing is that we're trying to do here is to try and make as many open doors for as many people as we possibly can. I know that it's strange, but really no more strange than anything has been for 2020. So if you would like to come and be a part of us, a part of our study tonight, and in that way, bring your lawn chair again, and we will do our best to make that possible for everybody. Thank you for being here this morning, though. I really had a hard time with this one. We talked about the Beatitudes the last couple times that I've spoken. The first one in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 3 is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." We talked about a sense of spiritual poverty, and the best example that I can think of in all the Bible of spiritual poverty is the Pharisee and the tax collector. The Pharisee looks up to God and says, "Thank you for not making me like that loser over there," but the tax collector has a sense of poverty of spirit, and he bows his head and he beats his chest and he cries out to God for mercy because he's a sinner. That's spiritual poverty. And so the main takeaway for disciples, especially this is a Sermon on the Mount, it's not for everyone, it's a manual for what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, especially for disciples. If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, poverty of spirit, to be poor in spirit is a requirement. To not think more of yourself than you ought, and certainly not to look down on other people as if you are inherently better than they are. The second one that we talked about last Sunday is verse 4, blessed are those who mourn. The first one is really an intellectual knowledge. I know who and what I am in the presence of God. I am spiritually bankrupt. I know that. The next one, blessed are those who mourn, is not an intellectual knowledge. It's an emotional response to that knowledge. It's easy for me to know something and to not feel it. And so the second one is to look at our lost condition, how I am before God, and not only to know that I'm poor in spirit, but to feel terrible because of it. To look at our lost world and how sin has saturated everything around us, and maybe even to shed tears because of it. Today what we're going to talk about is verse 5, blessed are the meek. This one was tough for me. Depending upon which version of the Bible you have, I imagine most of us are reading from English Standard Versions, and so your Bible will say, blessed are the meek. Not everybody's Bible here this morning will say, blessed are the meek. Some of your Bibles will say, blessed are the humble. And some of your versions of the Bible will say, blessed are the gentle. And so automatically when I see something like this, I think, all right, I have 3 steps of Bible study. Every single Bible study and every single sermon and class that I teach, they all follow the same 3-part pattern. What does the text say? What does the text mean? What does the text mean to me? The first thing in all Bible study is to say, what does the text say? And when you come to a passage like this, when different versions of the Bible say different things, it means you got to dig just a little bit deeper. What is going on here? What is Jesus saying? And what does Jesus intend for me to understand from this particular beatitude? There is a German commentator named Ulrich Luz who I started out with, and it did not fill me with a whole lot of confidence that I was going to find an easy answer. He says, no German or English, for that matter, translation of this word does justice to the fullness of meaning in the Greek word. So I'm starting off my Bible study. We're getting ready to jump into this. Blessed are the meek. All right, we need to figure out what does it mean to be meek. And I open up a commentary, and the very first thing that I see is somebody who says there is no word in English or German that adequately describes what we're talking about. Cool. So I'm going to try and describe something that doesn't have a word in the English language to describe it. If you look outside the Bible, the word often applies to things that are not people. And so in all kinds of ancient Greek text, you'll see this word refer to things like light. Maybe the word meek isn't the best to approach the word from this sense. It's probably better to think of it in the terms of like gentle. If you think of light that can be gentle, it applies to sound. It applies to wind. And so there is such a thing as a gentle wind as opposed to maybe a harsh wind. I can think of some ways that I could think of this sense of gentleness and how Jesus could be intending that. Blessed are those who are gentle, who are not harsh. There's a Bible lexicon, a dictionary that I go to first almost all the time. This is what it says. This word meek is not being overly impressed by a sense of one's self-importance. That's not really gentle, that's more humility. Not overly impressed by a sense of one's self-importance. If you have an English Standard Version study Bible in front of you, look down on this one. Yours gives an even different sense of the word. Depending upon which resource you're looking at, you're going to get all kinds of different input about what this word means and how this word is supposed to look in our lives. Your ESV Study Bible says that this word meek is those who do not assert themselves over others in order to further their own agendas and their own strength. This might be a good way to use the word meek. I'm not somebody who just drives over other people. I've got something in mind. I want my way, and so I'm going to run you down until I get my way and you accept my way. There's a word that kept popping up as I'm trying to figure out, what does meek mean? How am I going to approach this lesson and describe this beatitude? There's a word that kept popping up, first of all, that I don't even know, I'm not familiar with, and I'm not entirely sure how this word applies to meek. It's said in several resources, if you want to define meek, maybe the word equanimity would work well. I don't use the word equanimity on a regular basis in my life, so I had to look it up. Here's a definition. Mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. I read that definition and I thought, that's not meek or humble or gentle. But hang on just a second, because I think this is where I'm going to land at the end of this lesson. And I think that one of the ways that we can do this is to see that this beatitude is a quote from Psalm 37. Look at Matthew chapter 5 and verse 5, just so you can see it and have it in mind. Matthew 5 and verse 5, it says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Now turn over to Psalm 37. In Psalm 37, you're going to find this quote in verse 11. By the way, if you don't have cross-references in your Bible, it would be a really good idea to write this one down so you can remember that this is quoted in Matthew 5, and Jesus in Matthew 5 pulls it from Psalm 37 and verse 11. The meek shall inherit the earth. It's pretty much the same thing that Jesus said. And so I thought, okay, maybe Psalm 37, Jesus quotes from Psalm 37, maybe Psalm 37 is going to give me some direction about how to understand this word, blessed are the meek, and what it means to be meek, and what I'm supposed to do in my life to fulfill what Jesus told me about this one. So I read Psalm 37. Let's do it. Let's read Psalm 37 verses 1 through 11. "Fret not yourselves because of evildoers. Be not envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him, and He will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as light and your justice as the noonday. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Fret not yourselves over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil desires. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself, it tends only to evil. For the evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. In just a little while the wicked will be no more. Though you look carefully at his place, he will not be there, and delight themselves." Verse 11. "But the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace." So I read Psalm 37 verses 1 through 11, and I thought, okay, I'm not sure I can come up with a one-sentence definition of what it means to be meek or gentle or humble for that. So I opened up some commentaries on Psalm 37. Maybe I can get some help. And this is the first sentence that I came across for Psalm 37. The first 11 verses are the most direct exposition we have of the third beatitude, which is where they end. This commentator says Psalm 37 is the most direct statement we have about what it means to be meek, and what Jesus said in Matthew 5 and verse 5. There's another one. I'm going to share just one more with you, and then we'll get into it. It says, there is no finer exposition of the third beatitude than this psalm, from which is drawn verse 11. And so here's what I would like to do for the rest of our time, is just to think about Psalm 37 and how it might teach us about what it means to be meek. The very first thing to notice about Psalm 37 is that the main theme seems to be, especially in verses 1 through 11, fret not. A literal treatment of the Hebrew right there would be something like, don't get heated. Or if we wanted to say this in Ryan language, I would say something like, don't get all worked up about stuff all the time. Fret not. You see it here in verse 1, Psalm 37 in verse 1. Fret not yourself because of evildoers. You see it at the end, or in the middle, I guess, of verse 7. Fret not yourself over the one who prospers in his way. And you see it at the end of verse 8. Fret not yourself. It tends only to evil. Don't get yourself all worked up. Don't get heated. Fret not. And this is not, Psalm 37 is not a version of what I might do when I say something to somebody. We learned this in the police academy. And even though I may not have learned it in the police academy, I've learned it the hard way with my wife. Whenever somebody gets worked up, do you know what is the two words never to say? If you want somebody to calm down, don't say calm down. It doesn't work. If you go to somebody's house on a police call and there's some sort of domestic issue and everybody's mad and angry and shouting and out of control, and you walk in on the scene and you say, hey, calm down, guaranteed not to work. This is not what Psalm 37 is doing. The author of Psalm 37 is not saying to his audience, calm down, everyone, in the midst of hard times. As if it's just some sort of, hey, just settle down right now. Don't get so worked up. Psalm 37 in verses 1 through 11 are some reasons why we can not get all worked up and why we cannot fret. I would give you just two quick reasons. Number one, the author of Psalm 37 says, here is why you're able to fret not. Here's why we as God's people can calm down and not get all worked up. Number one, because we are able to look up to God. There's 6 different things in these 11 verses that teach us about looking up to God. Look at chapter 37, verse 3, and the very first start. Trust in the Lord and do good. We're able to maintain a sense of calm and not get worked up because we trust in God. We're looking up to Him. Look at the second one. At the second part of verse 3, it says, dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. I love that one. Make faithfulness your best friend. That's how you can look up to God and not get all worked up and excited. Look at verse 4. Here's the third thing about looking up. Delight yourselves in the Lord. You know what? Serving God is not a burden. He is the God of all grace and mercy and love and perfection. And for people to say, oh, Christianity and service to God, it is such a burden. It's not a burden to serve God. Jesus said, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that my load is gentle and my burden is light. And so our job is not to look at our service to God and think, oh man, what a hard and miserable life I have to live as a Christian. What the psalmist is saying here is to delight yourself in the Lord. I am grateful for Christianity and what it means to live in this way. I'm looking up to God. In verse 5, I really like this one. This is number 4 about looking up to God. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act. This is how we're able to look up to God and not fret and worry about life, because we commit our way to the Lord. There's something really neat about these words. To illustrate it, turn over to Joshua chapter 5. In our Bibles, it says, commit your way to the Lord. If you were going to treat the Hebrew literally, you would say something like this instead. Roll your way upon the Lord. And Joshua chapter 5 and verse 9 helps me to see that. When the Exodus generation was wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years, apparently nobody circumcised their kids. And so they come to the point where they're getting ready to cross over the Jordan River and go in to take the land, and God is upset. And so Joshua says, hey, everybody, we got to take care of this in order to be faithful with God. In Joshua chapter 5 and verse 9, listen to what it says. The Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the approach of Egypt from you. Israel, for 40 years, had this sin that they were carrying around with them. And God says, Joshua, before you go into the promised land, you have got to take care of this. And Joshua did it. And God said, all right, here's what I'm going to do with that sin. I'm going to roll it off of my people so it's not there anymore. That's what Psalm 37 and verse 5 is, only it's not with our sin, it's what we do with ourself and our cares and our anxiety, in the sense of when God says, fret not, we do that because we take the things that are causing us problems and we roll our way upon the Lord. God, I don't have to worry about this because you're God. I'm going to roll my troubles onto you. And He's happy to carry them for us. Number 5, about looking up so that we don't fret. At the very first of verse 7, be still before the Lord and wait patiently before Him. The stillness of biblical waiting, whenever you read wait for the Lord, is not the same thing as resting and doing nothing. It means to be still in your soul and in your spirit and to wait for God to act. And when I do that, I don't have to fret about things in this life. The last one, number 6, is in the first part of verse 8. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not. Well, thanks a lot, psalmist, for telling me to calm down and to fret not. And he says, no, I'm not just walking in the room and saying, calm down, don't worry about things. I'm going to tell you why you can fret not. Number 1, because you look up to God and you're able to do these 6 things. That's going to help you to calm down. Number 2, not only looking up to God, but looking ahead to eternity. You see a couple things in Psalm 37 in verse 2 about the evil. It says at the very start of 37 verse 1, fret not yourself because of evildoers. In verse 2, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Look at verses 9 and 10. You see something similar. Evildoers shall be cut off. In verse 10, in just a little while the wicked will be no more. Though you look carefully at his place, he will not be there. Don't get yourself all worked up. Calm down, fret not, because God is going to, at least eventually, God is going to take care of the sin and the problems of this world. And it's not only in Psalm 37 about look ahead to eternity because God's going to get rid of the evildoers and punish them. He says, you who do righteous, you are going to be rewarded. In Psalm 37, the idea over and over again is, this is from our Beatitude, you who are righteous, you will inherit the land. Look at it in verse 9. Those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. In verse 11, the meek shall inherit the land. That's our Beatitude. In verse 22, those blessed by the Lord shall inherit the land. In verse 29, the righteous shall inherit the land. In verse 34, wait for the Lord and keep His way, and He will exalt you to inherit the land. Fret not, Christians. Don't get heated. Don't get worked up. And dare I even have the nerve to say this: calm down. Because we as God's people, we don't have to get all worked up. Because we look up to God and we look ahead to eternity. Now these 11 verses and this context of Psalm 37, it might not help me to have a one-sentence definition and be able to say, this is what it means to be meek. But the context has provided us at least with an example of what God is looking for in His people, what it means to be meek and gentle and humble in this. It's a group of people, followers of Jesus, who trust in God, who look up and who look ahead, and because of that, they're able to maintain a sense of calm in a world that is saturated with sin. Do you remember that word, equanimity? Mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. There's a couple places in the Bible where I think you get a taste of what this looks like. Look at Titus chapter 3. In Titus chapter 3, Paul is writing to Titus about what he himself is supposed to be and what he is supposed to teach his audience to be. In Titus chapter 3 and verses 1 and 2, Paul says to Titus, this is what I want you to teach people, Titus, and how I want you to behave. I want you to remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities. Now listen, you got to read between the lines here just a little bit. This is the difficult situation, to be submissive to authorities, especially in this world that Paul and Titus are living in. That's the hard stuff. Remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities. Remind them to be obedient, to be ready for every good work. Listen, to speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, and to be gentle, to show perfect courtesy toward all people. Remember that word equanimity? That word keeps popping up in all of these different circumstances. What Paul told Titus to do here. What he's doing is he's saying to Titus, maintain a sense of mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. There's another one. Look over at 2 Timothy chapter 2. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, surely you will feel the difficulty of what Paul is saying here. In verses 24 and 25, the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. You got that? That doesn't mean being gentle to the people who are gentle to you or being kind to the people who are kind to you. It's your opponents. It's the people who are giving you a difficult time in life. And what Paul says to Timothy throughout this letter, remember when Adam taught 1st and 2nd Timothy and he said, here are the 3 things we need to remember about Timothy. One of those things has to do with dealing with false teachers. This is serious. But even when we deal with false teachers, Paul says, correct your opponents with gentleness. This is the kind of people that we're supposed to be. I wonder if you take this concept, especially if you want to think about the context of Psalm 37, fret not because you look up and because you look ahead. Or if you take the definition of equanimity in this situation and you say, blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who maintain mental calmness. Blessed are those who maintain their composure and evenness of temper, even when things get hard. That's a pretty high standard. Can I just point you to one more passage and then we'll wrap this up? Look over, if you will, at Numbers chapter 12. The reason why I'm going back to Numbers chapter 12 is because our word meek is used here in verse 3. And it's used in such a way that at least makes me think I ought to be able to learn something about what this word means and how I'm supposed to do it in my life from this example. In Numbers chapter 12 and verse 3, I'll show you where the word is used. It says, "Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all people who were on the face of the earth." So how about this? If we can look at the context here of what caused God to say that Moses was meek more than anybody else on earth, if we can look at Moses' response that caused God to say this in Numbers 12, maybe we can learn something about this word and what it's going to look like in my life and how I'm supposed to act. Start in verse 1. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" And the Lord heard it. I want you to imagine how you would respond in a situation like this. Moses' brother and sister come to him and they're critical of his wife. Now, I don't need to add anything more to the list besides this one. If you come to me critical of my wife, we're done. The boxing gloves are coming on. It's time to wrestle about this. Because you're not going to come to me and me maintain this sense of mental calmness and composure if you're going to criticize my wife to me. Moses' brother and sister come and they say, "Look at her." Now, let me tell you something else. This is an opinion. But I think this is what's happening in the text here. I think that Moses' first wife has already died, and he marries a Cushite woman. Cush is biblical Ethiopia, which I assume means that Moses' new wife was a black woman. And I don't know if this is what caused the criticism against Moses, but at least what I can imagine is, and it's not so hard to imagine it in our world today, Moses' brother and sister come to him and they say, "How dare you, Moses, marry this woman?" And it's not only a criticism of the woman, it's a criticism of Moses himself and the decision that he made to marry this woman. And not only those two things, I'm going to criticize your wife, I'm going to criticize you and your decision-making ability. And not only that, I'm going to question your authority and your leadership. They say, "Has God only spoken to Moses? He spoke to us too." And so here in this situation, Aaron and Miriam act in the same way as all of the other rebellious sinners throughout the book of Exodus and Numbers, trying to raise up a rebellion against Moses. Now let me ask you to put yourself in Moses' shoes in these circumstances. I'm going to criticize your wife, I'm going to criticize your decision-making ability, and I'm going to question your authority or your leadership. How do you respond in that situation? Well, in verse 3, we're told that Moses was very meek, more than anybody else in the world. You can see Moses' response after God strikes Miriam with leprosy. In Numbers chapter 12 and verse 13, Moses cried to the Lord, "Oh God, please heal her, please." Praying for the one who gave you a hard time. Criticizing, praying for the one, advocating for the one who criticized you and made your life miserable. Moses is described as very meek, more than all the people who are on the face of the earth. I wonder if our word equanimity would apply to this situation. Mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. Blessed are the meek. Anybody lost their mind in the last 5 months? Anybody had a breakdown? Where you just say to yourself, "I can't do this anymore." My kids have to stay at home all day, every day, and look at a computer screen to do school for 6 hours a day for the next who knows how long. That's the reason why I don't have any more hair. Dealing with things like this. I got to figure out how to hook up another speaker. We got to do more to make this. I don't know what your breakdown has looked like. I've had lots of them. I could just go through the list and tell you what the opposite of composure and mental stability looks like in the last 5 months. And not only the last 5 months, but a general description of your life overall. Jesus says, not to everybody, but to his disciples. This is a manual of discipleship. If you want to be one of my followers, you have to be poor in spirit. You have to emotionally respond to that spiritual poverty and mourn. And you have to be meek. You have to be somebody who is mentally calm and composed and maintains an evenness of temper. Listen, the sentence isn't over yet. Especially in a difficult situation. That's what Psalm 37 teaches us about Matthew 5 and verse 5, and blessed are the meek. You know, Jesus is the ultimate picture of this. The same word is used in Matthew 11 and verse 29. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle. There's our word. For I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. In Matthew 21 and verse 5, the word is used a second time describing Jesus. Behold, your king is coming, humble. There's our word. And mounted on a donkey. I'm not sure that I've finished this lesson with a complete understanding about how I'm going to define the meek. But what I know more than anything else is that I've got some stuff to work on. And I'm guessing that you probably do too. Whether it's humility and not thinking more of yourself than you should, or gentleness, calming down, equanimity. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. If you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, one thing that I want to make sure that you understand as we go through each of these Beatitudes week after week, and Jesus gives us this high bar of standards about poor in spirit, and blessed are those who mourn, and blessed are the meek. Jesus is not saying, come to me, be baptized. When you come up out of the waters of baptism, now you're a Christian, and you are, boom, instantly supposed to be perfect and have all of these things figured out. I told you already that I'm still struggling and working on some of these things. I've been a Christian for 20 years. This is not something that Jesus says you have to have all figured out before you become a Christian, or that you have to immediately perfect the second after you become a Christian. These are the things that those of us who are Christians should be working on in our lives every single day. If you want to start that journey this morning, if you know what you need to do in order to become a Christian, you want to start working on this sense of mental composure because you can look up to God and look ahead to eternity. We would love to help you with that. Come up here now as together we stand and sing the song of invitation. You don't have to stand, it's just a habit as we sing the invitation song.
Come unto me, 825.